Hello and welcome to this online debate on the energy crunch and the business confidence crisis, hosted in association with Empower Business Solutions. I'm James Murray, I'm the editor of BusinessGreen, and really looking forward to chairing this discussion over the next hour or so. We'll just give people a few more seconds to make sure we're logged on, and then we will get underway with the discussion. Cool, excellent. Well, I can see we're pretty much core it, so we will get underway now. Before we start, I'd just like to introduce myself and our expert panel. As I mentioned, I'm James Murray. I'm the editor of Business Green, and delighted to be joined today by three experts in this space. We have Amie Jones, who is senior policy advisor at the CBI, Arjan Geveke, who is director at EIUG, and Anthony Ainsworth, who is the COO at Empower Business Solutions. And we are hosting what is an absolutely critical topic for many businesses at what is a hugely turbulent and challenging time for the economy as a whole. There's quite rightly been a huge amount of focus on the implications of spiraling energy costs and energy security concerns for households, and particularly fuel poor households, and the immense challenges that's presenting to people up and down the country, and of course to policymakers and politicians as they wrestle with what is looking like an incredibly bleak economic outlook in the coming months as these prices continue to stretch upwards. But perhaps unsurprisingly, there's been a bit less focus on the way that many in business are facing very, very similar challenges. Those energy costs have also increased drastically for many businesses across the country. To such a point that even businesses where energy wasn't typically a large part of their cost base are seeing those rises. And of course, more energy intensive organizations facing real pressures as a result of the costs coming through. And of course, in the business market, no energy cap to manage how these costs come through in quite the same way. This is having significant implications, putting a lot of pressure on businesses to look at how they can reduce those costs, how they can manage those costs. And also, there are some opportunities that result because it's changed the return on investment dynamic for the various clean technologies and energy efficiency measures that maybe businesses previously had thought weren't necessarily the best payback suddenly look a lot more attractive given costs are so high and looks like they're likely to stay so for quite some time. So we're going to be looking at all aspects of this debate over the next hour or so. What we can expect from costs in the future and how this energy crunch is affecting businesses and of course impacting business confidence as well potentially. But then hopefully we'll also be looking at some of the potential solutions, some of the way of mitigating some of these risks and seizing some of the opportunities that could result from this period of quite considerable turbulence, because with that turbulence does come some opportunities. As I say, we've got a fantastic panel ready to talk through this topic. But before we get underway, I'm going to start by introducing Anthony from Empower Business Solutions, who's going to present some key findings from a new report that the company is releasing today under the title of its Business Energy Tracker, which will give us some context for this debate as we move through the hour. So, Anthony, over to you. The digital floor is now yours.
Thank you very much, James, and welcome everybody. So we want to introduce to you the Business Energy Tracker that we are releasing today. So if I could have the next slide, please. And the next one. Excellent, thank you very much. So the Business Energy Tracker is a comprehensive insight from 200 large businesses in the UK. It is cross-sector. It is for businesses that are spending more than £20,000 a year on energy, and within this survey, actually 60% are spending up to £1 million a year, and 40% are spending over £1 million a year on energy. We also conducted some in-depth interviews with representatives of those companies as well. So we wanted to know how businesses are feeling right now about some of the hot topics in energy, the impact that's having on their business confidence, and particularly when it comes to investing. The plan is that the Business Energy Tracker becomes an annual initiative so that we can track progress, and from that we can raise the profile of concerns that businesses have. Next slide, please. So why are we doing it? Well, Empower Business Solutions and E.ON have a long track record of putting forward the business side of energy. Whilst domestic issues tend to grab the headlines. It's really vital that somebody is speaking up for business and business is heard too. But beyond that, if we want to hit net zero by 2050, then businesses are going to play a critical role in the next year. Next year is a decade of delivery that we really need to start accelerating both investment and the transition towards that cleaner energy. But understandably, right now, confidence is low after a very turbulent 2 years. Businesses are focused on short-term recovery, but with the spiraling energy costs, cost of living, inflation rising, it's possible that this focus on delivery and energy transition could stall. So that's why this research is really key to do right now. The pulse of business, understanding confidence, the attitudes to investment, and how that may affect decarbonisation going forward. It also really demonstrates that we're listening to businesses and that we want to be a strong voice for business with government and other industry bodies. And as such, we're going to be presenting these results to government very shortly. Next slide, please. So let me tell you a little bit about some of the key findings from this research. So next slide. So over the last 12 months, clearly COVID-19 has been a huge business priority and has had a negative impact on investment plans in the UK. But looking forward, when asked about the current risks, energy costs have now overtaken COVID-19 as the biggest industry concern, cited by close to 80% of businesses. And within that, the volatility of wholesale energy markets, the cost of energy, is the biggest concern for more than half of the businesses that we spoke to. And behind that, also concerns about the security of energy supply in the UK. But we also asked whether progress towards net zero has stalled. And the reality is not yet. Businesses are still actively investing in net zero and see the environmental, commercial, and reputational benefits it can bring. But confidence has weakened over the last couple of years. And so business needs support to keep things on track, keep raising awareness of the path to net zero and the incentives that are needed to drive that forward. Next slide. So businesses overwhelmingly believe that government action is needed. More government action is needed to protect them against market volatility and rising energy costs. Over 80% feel that not enough is being done to protect business from that, and 1 in 5 think nothing is being done at all. Energy is now a board level concern for 8 out of 10 businesses, and they're calling for stronger government policy to increase UK energy independence, which in turn will help reduce costs and support net zero. And we've had recent announcements such as the energy security strategy. Do they do enough? No, not yet. We need more awareness and stronger incentives, and that's what businesses are calling for. Next slide, please. Here's an example, a quote from a university. That it's not just the domestic sector, it's not the commercial sector, but also the public sector really struggling with the cost of energy as well, and the lack of investment funds to invest in that energy efficiency, self-sufficiency, and the transition towards net zero. So not all business sectors can pass on costs to customers, and here's an example where they can't do that. And what are businesses calling for? Next slide, please. So getting back to net zero, businesses still want to play their part. So over half of businesses want more incentives to switch to renewable energy. They need to help manage through the current investment crisis. They're still concerned about costs and how to fund that transition of their business. And they want to see more investment in technologies to support net zero plans, more incentives to go green, more investment in technologies to support net zero, and more market or revenue mechanisms to help them contribute to the energy system in the future. So wanting to participate in that participation. So it's not so much should we decarbonize, businesses are saying, but how can we play our part in decarbonisation? And I think the real answer there is in energy efficiency and also in self-sufficiency too. Next slide. Another quote from the survey, again from the public sector, which is interesting, saying that they don't think the government is doing enough, that the policies are too late, and that they have to fight hard to get the investment that they need. So there is the momentum there, and what this business energy tracker really highlights is the support that's needed to keep that going on. Next slide. Also highlights what we call the race to resilience. That businesses and industry looking for ways to boost their energy resilience, and it's energy efficiency within that resilience is a really key tactic to helping make that transition. So 58% of companies really starting to invest in energy efficiency more, and the bigger the amount of energy the money you spend on energy, the larger that proportion really looking hard at energy efficiency is. But also businesses starting to look at self-sufficiency through investment on on-site generation as well, whether that could be solar PV or other forms of on-site generation. And this is really coming up fast as a key opportunity for businesses. So again, it's that efficiency, self-sufficiency, and potentially even flexibility with a mix of on-site generation and taking power from the grid. So just to summarize what comes next on the last slide here. So really saying that every industry stakeholder has a role in supporting UK businesses to support the current crisis, but create confidence and create incentives to keep investing in that movement towards net zero plans. Takeaways: energy is the #1 concern around boardroom costs right now. There's a need to promote much more energy efficiency and self-sufficiency. And from a return on investment point of view, the age-old trilemma of cost, carbon, and security, all of these things now are pulling in the same direction, and the investment case for doing this is really strong. So something like a solar on-site generation, payback could have been 10 years or more in the past, and now that's down to, in some cases, less than 3 years, which makes a really good business. So James, thank you for letting me share those results.
Excellent, thank you, Anthony. Fascinating stuff, and yeah, really interesting to see such a large survey, such a comprehensive survey, and that this really is a priority for many businesses. This is now, as you say, a top concern. Excellent. So over the next 20 minutes or so, we're going to just discuss some of the findings there, some of the wider themes, and then we will also look to get some of your questions as well in the second half of the session. So please, I understand, I think you can just put your questions in the question section, and we'll try and get through some of those. Amie, I'm going to come to you first. I mean, just looking at the results there from the Empower Business Solutions survey, I mean, one of the most striking things was this is now a top priority for many businesses. Any surprises there? Is that similar to what you're hearing from CBI members, that this really is a kind of burning issue right now?
Thank you, James, and thank you to Empower for having me on the panel today. I think absolutely energy is a top priority, but I think before we dive into the energy debate, it is worth remembering that there's an awful lot of other things going on in the wider economic environment which are impacting businesses and impacting business costs. So our members at the CBI are grappling with things like wider supply chain disruption, cost of commodities, which of course is driven partly by the energy costs as well, but also things like labour shortages and general inflation. So there's an awful lot going on, and our businesses are having to consider energy in the round with all these other pressures as well. I think...
Sorry, I was going to say that. What's the sort of best practice then? I mean, how are they starting to navigate it, given, as you say, it is such a challenging time, and almost, I mean, so the last decade seems to be challenging time after challenging time, but this one really does feel like a real crunch for many businesses. How do they manage that, and how do they help prioritize the energy issue that, as you said, is kind of at the foundation of so many of these problems?
Yes, I think, as we heard from Anthony's presentation, for the first time for many businesses, energy is now a boardroom issue. It's right at the top of the agenda. So the key thing for businesses now is to actually understand their energy, understand how much they use, understand where they get their energy from. Are they in hedge contracts? Are they buying from the wholesale? And also, where is their energy consumption going? Have they got plans already in place to self-generate? Have they got plans to expand their production? Are they going to be consuming more energy in the next 12, 18 months and beyond? So I think the first stop for a lot of businesses for the first time is to really understand what is going on with their energy consumption. And then I think that the second part is to then understand how can they manage these increased costs. So for some businesses, we've seen they are able to pass on a portion of these costs to their consumers through the prices of their products and services. But for a lot of businesses and a lot of sectors, that isn't an option. Take your heavy industries, for example, your cement, your glass, your chemicals. They're in globally traded sectors. And if we start increasing the cost of UK products and services, we're going to outprice ourselves from these global markets. So it can be really risky. So I'd say just two takeaways. One, understand your energy, get to grips with what you consume, how you consume it. And then two, work out actually, can you pass it on, or do you need to look at other ways to absorb those costs and manage it within your wider financial structure?
Anthony, I'll just come back to you here. I mean, it's interesting what Amie's saying, that kind of understanding your energy use and looking to optimize it. I mean, obviously, I've covered this space for a long time. That's kind of been best practice for a long time. Is there still lots of businesses that aren't taking those kind of first steps towards managing this? Is this the chance for businesses to do what arguably they should have been doing a good 5-10 years ago?
Yeah, I think the cost of energy right now is a real catalyst to do that. And if it's a board level topic for 80% of businesses, then I think that's going to put the real sort of impetus behind it. And I couldn't agree with Amie more that the starting point is for businesses to understand, what they're paying for energy, where they're using their energy within their businesses, whether it's in manufacturing processes, whether it's in the office space, heating, lighting, cooling, etc. All of those types of things all can be looked at, and the best way to reduce costs first is to reduce the amount of energy that you're using. Then you can look at how you control the energy, self-sufficiency from that. But yeah, James, I completely agree. This should be a real catalyst for CFOs, CEOs to start really looking at their energy costs.
And in most cases, there are things you can do. I'm right in saying, you can often quite big savings are available, sometimes with some investment, but this is not a completely irresolvable problem. There's steps you can take usually.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, simple things, very simple things like looking at the light bulbs that you've got in buildings, remote energy management of buildings, looking at heating, cooling, refrigeration, all of those types of things before you even get to core manufacturing processes as well. But even things can be done there with digital artificial intelligence and production mapping, etc.
And one last quick question. I'm struck by the fact that 80% of companies now have this as a board level issue. What's happening with the other 20%? I mean, is this something that really should be on every board's agenda, or for some businesses is still energy, as Amie said, one of many concerns, and maybe it's something they still feel they can manage a bit lower down the chain?
I mean, I would say, if businesses are wrestling with a number of things, it depends on their priorities for their business, their sector, and as Amie said, being competitive is really important. But this survey had almost 50% spending $1 million or more on their energy, and it's really it's a big number, so it's a critical interest to them. But for people spending less than that, if you want to be credible going forward, I think you need to have a net zero strategy for your employees, for your customers, your supply chain. So if it's not a top of the agenda issue now, it should be shortly.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's easy to forget with all the focus on cost. The carbon element is still absolutely critical here. Arjan, I'm come to you. I'm going to let's talk a little bit about those companies that Anthony mentioned that are spending £1 million plus on energy currently. I mean, EIUG, for those who don't know, Energy Intensive Users Group, you represent those businesses for which energy is, absolutely critical and a huge part of their cost base. I mean, what is that sector feeling right now, and how are they navigating what is such a considerable challenge?
We get a bit of a nuanced picture out of it at the moment. So obviously, gas and electricity prices have increased quite significantly, basically on the spot market. But most of the companies have probably struck an agreement based on a tariff from last year. So they're not directly feeling the exposure, but it depends on the procurement strategy they had. And some have locked themselves in, some have a rolling negotiation with the supplier, some buy on the spot market. Those latter ones basically really feel the cost at the moment and they struggle. And then it depends, if you do feel at a high price, are you able to pass it on? Again, some sectors, I'll take chemicals as an example. Coming out of lockdown, the demand of chemical products has been quite high, which puts them in a position to pass on these costs, despite seeing hefty increases. But that will potentially expire as well if the economy goes into more of a recession again. So it depends, and it is currently quite company specific. But seeing that all the contracts at one point have to be negotiated and all energy industries will feel then the higher prices, even if you look at the forward prices, they will see an increase in the cost base coming from energy.
Yeah, absolutely. So some exposed currently, but others will obviously be concerned that exposure is coming down the line. I mean, what can be done then? I mean, there's obviously been a lot of case, but with these companies in particular, a lot of talk about policy. Are they getting enough support? Do they need more support? And also, how does this play into the decarbonisation agenda, which obviously for these energy and often carbon intensive companies, even without the economic challenge, would have to be a top priority?
Yep. So over the past years, the long-standing issue was the difference, the electricity price difference between the UK and rest of the world, basically, particularly the rest of Europe, which has been more structural, of course, and mainly due to policy and network charging. Now, to be unfair to the government, they have taken some measures in the energy security strategy to address that. So the compensation schemes for the indirect emission cost due to the UK ETS and carbon price mechanism for the most electricity intensive has gone up to reflecting the higher carbon price, and government has now allocated almost 800 million for the next 3 years to compensate up to a point for that, for those indirect emission costs. Government will also consult on increasing the level of reduction for the indirect cost due to the renewable charges, and there potentially some other measures along the way as well. And they all tackle more or less the policy cost element in the industrial electricity price. So that would mitigate some of the industrial electricity price differential. But again, that's electricity. On gas, that's probably the bigger issue now, where the current gas price increase will force them to reflect that into their input cost and output cost. Now, the Commission in the European Union side, they have offered changed the state aid guidelines to allow member states to provide relief for the cost due to cost increases, mainly due to the Russian invasion and that time period. And over here, the government can do the same. And you build on the same kind of support scheme as on the COVID, where you have support loans. Companies may remember the COVID, large companies' COVID support scheme loans, basically. And I think we're coming into the situation where you probably need to do the same thing.
Okay, so something as direct as loans could have to be on the agenda. Amie, I come to you. Obviously, CBI works very closely with government and talks to them all the time about these. I mean, what's your view? Is did the energy security strategy and some of these others have they gone far enough? What more do you think is needed to help both energy intensive companies and I suppose mainstream companies as well that are similarly seeing these costs rise?
Yeah, I think it's worth saying that I feel for government in this situation. They've got an awful lot to contend with this crisis. This isn't just a business crisis. This is a cost of living crisis for domestic consumers as well. So we have seen government act for consumers, but we know further pressures are going to come. We haven't seen government act on the consumer demand side on those energy efficiency measures. So just to put that out there, we need more support for the consumers. We need energy efficiency measures because that's what's going to make an impact for this winter and help reduce consumer bills. I think Arjan is completely right on the energy security strategy. It was a good start for the energy intensive sectors, but it didn't do anything else for business, for those wider businesses. So absolutely cash flow support over the coming winter will be critical if we are to see these high prices continue at the peaks they're at. And I think looking slightly longer term as well, we need to see continued support for decarbonisation. It was really great to see the energy security strategy not deviate from the government's plan. If anything, it's gone even more ambitious with, critical technologies like offshore wind, hydrogen and nuclear all getting new increased targets. So from that perspective, really great to see government's commitment. We now need to see them follow through with the policy measures which are going to bring these technologies at scale, at pace, in time, to actually make a difference to our energy security, help reduce wholesale prices, help in energy intensive sectors unlock new fuels like hydrogen where possible. So I think great start with the energy security strategy. Now let's get on with delivering at that alongside those shorter term measures of support, which Arjan really greatly outlined.
Yeah. And Anthony, your survey showed that, businesses, a large majority of businesses want more action in this space. I was particularly struck by the question of more incentives to get renewables and energy efficiency projects happening. I suppose if I put my treasury hat on here and play devil's advocate, the argument would be, well, that these technologies now are really attractive on their own. As you said, the return on investment's good. Should the government continuing to play a role in incentivizing something that arguably you can make a case for on a market basis. Obviously, but a lot of your members, a lot of the people you surveyed, obviously did feel that there were still barriers that needed to be overcome. There was help here. What's your take on what the government could and should be doing to try and catalyse things further?
Yeah, so the survey said that over 80% of businesses want more to be done, and almost 20% think nothing is being done. So one thing that the government has got is a challenge of awareness of what is out there to support businesses in the medium term.
Because there is, I'm sorry, just to interrupt. There is stuff out there, isn't there? There's like tax breaks, there's
so
capital allowances, there's things like that
exactly
that
just
do
about
help.
to come on to that.
Sorry,
So there are the particular assets that qualify for business rate adjustments, and that looks like it'll extend into the next decade. But the super deduction for investment in energy efficiency and on-site generation only runs until March next year. And I think one great thing that the Chancellor could do would announce an extension of that, so it becomes much more of a medium term strategy. Because if a business is looking at its investment plans, responding to business crises, to suddenly go, oh, we only have 12 months to invest in this, that's too short of a period. So I think a little bit of an extension of those super deductions would be a really strong incentive and signal. And then coming back to what Arjan was saying before about carbon taxes and carbon trading, we try to make sure that we have competitive industry base. We don't want carbon leakage, so we don't want business slipping away to countries that don't quite have that same focus on net zero. But at the same time, gas has an implicit subsidy versus electricity in the way that the carbon taxes come through. So I think there's probably a little bit more that can be done with the, let's say, the stick side of things on gas, and more that can be done with the carrot of incentives and perhaps the super deductions being extended.
And you touched on it there, the communications challenge here as well, in that there have been these moves to make these technologies more attractive, and the capital allowance in particular. And yet, as you said, the people you surveyed, and I find this as well, lots of businesses don't necessarily know that these options are out there.
Yeah, so the government's, there's been a flurry of papers at the back end of last year around COP26 and some this year as well, but they do tend to be aiming at the medium to longer term. For example, the hydrogen strategy and cluster. We're talking about things a decade away, and businesses need help and incentives and encouragement right now. So I think there is an awareness gap and maybe even a credibility gap of what businesses can do now.
Absolutely. But let's move on to the wider sort of net zero agenda and look at that long term a little bit. Again, one of the positives here was there doesn't seem to be huge wavering on commitment to net zero. Lots of companies still looking at investments in sustainability and clean technologies as a top priority. But I was struck by your presentation, Anthony. The yet word was in there. Will that persist if the economic headwinds are as tough as people fear? I want to bring everyone in on this because it's such a crucial topic. Amie, I'll come to you first, then Arjan. I mean, what's your feeling from your member base? I mean, is it borne out there is that survey is the case, that people are still prioritising it, and if so, are there any concerns about maybe a bit of a wobble on how much they can afford to prioritise it, given the short term challenges we're all facing?
Yeah, I think absolutely our membership at CBI is holding strong on net zero. I think if we just take a look back, I think 6-9 months to COP26, the huge business presence we saw there, the huge raft of commitments that we saw coming out of businesses, science-based targets, wider sustainability targets. Business is serious about net zero, and that's not going anywhere yet. These targets are built into company plans for the next decade. You know, some businesses have net zero targets as soon as 2030, so they can't back down on that. They are committed to it. I think the question now is very much a question of cost and cash. And just going back to that last point on, I think the issue is cash flow for many businesses at the moment. You know, we've had examples of businesses in heavy industry who want to invest in fuel switching, but have had to delay that because they don't have the cash flow at the moment to make that switch. But of course, this is different across different sectors, across different industries, and the type of decarbonisation investments they're making have different capital upfront costs. So for some, they are able to carry on with their plans. For some who will be involved in those big infrastructure investments, there is starting to be a bit of a question as to whether that does need to be paused slightly, or whether they need to reconsider how they go about that. But on the whole, business is not backing down from net zero. And I think the really big thing here, as I said before, is to get that government policy in place to give businesses that confidence to invest. You know, we're in a very unstable economic environment. Investors could be spooked by what's going on. We need to make sure we have the policy and the regulation that, you know, this is going to happen. Net zero isn't going anywhere. The transition is happening. So we need to unblock key investments, things like CCUS and hydrogen, by finalising the business models to help it boost our energy resilience. We need to really double down on renewables. We need to cut consenting for offshore wind. So there's a lot government can do to support that business confidence as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll come to you because obviously, you know, for energy intensives, this is probably more challenging than most, the net zero transition. I mean, on one hand, you've got a lot of these companies more committed to this agenda than they've ever been. We're seeing some fascinating work going on with hydrogen, carbon capture and storage, and the like. And company technologies and industries that a few years ago people said could never be decarbonised or would be incredibly difficult, we're now seeing pilot projects that work and proving that it can be done. And then, yet on the other hand, as Amie was just sketching out, you know, the cost challenges for those businesses more acute than any other space, really. I mean, what's your take on how businesses are trying to ensure that net zero remains prioritised whilst dealing with the cost challenges that we've been discussing?
Yeah, that's why energy industry is often called a hard to debate sector. It's a similar point. These technologies, it depends on the sector how they decarbonize. When I was in government, we did a large project back in 2012 and 2015 called 2050 Roadmaps, just to analyze what technologies should be deployed for these sectors and able to decarbonize on the various decarbonization scenarios. And in theory, the technologies are there, be it hydrogen, CCUS, or basically fuel switching towards electrification. However, these technologies, these decarbonization technologies, require pretty big upfront capital cost. And even if you have that, their operational costs are higher. Again, if you electrify, you basically fill with the relatively high electricity prices. So that's where energy and look for government to address that. So the technologies in theory are there and technically are possible. Just making them stack up economically and then commercially. So even if you implement, invest in new decarbonization technology with all the capital cost, plus a higher ongoing operational cost, you then, in theory, put yourself into a competitive disadvantage internationally if you're exposed to products from abroad that do not do these things. So these need to all play in the mix to design some kind of either regulatory framework or up to a point a business support framework to implement these policies. Again, any industry are willing to invest, but just they can't do it at themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. Anthony, come to you on that broad question as well. I mean, are you pleasantly surprised at the level of commitment that's currently continuing for net zero that your survey revealed, or are you slightly concerned that, you know, as to how resilient that will prove if the economic challenges prove as acute as some fear?
I think it's a little bit mixed at the moment. So there is the commitment to it, but almost 50% of businesses in the survey think that current energy crisis will harm progress towards that net zero. But a third think actually it will be a bit of a catalyst. So it is quite finely balanced, and that's why I think it needs nurturing carefully through awareness, through incentives, through penalties, if you like. And I think one of the topics that was coming up there a few times is the access to finance, structured finance, whether that is on balance sheet directly or off balance sheet through partnerships, or even in some cases having other people build the generation capacity for you, and you taking a direct feed power purchase agreement over 10 or 20 years. So there are lots of different ways that it can be done. But I think right now, to answer your question, James, it's finely balanced. And if we don't give it that push, it could slip back.
Yeah, no, a worrying point. Let's try and finish this first part of the discussion on an upbeat point. I mean, I suppose any discussion of energy tends to default a little bit towards policy, but given, if we're being generous, given the government is facing a very challenging hand, if we're being less generous, maybe the government has created some challenges of its own accord, and maybe is going to struggle to fast track some of these changes that we arguably need to see. What can businesses do themselves? You know, where can they sort of take responsibility to tackle this issue on their own and take some positive steps to deal with the energy crunch that they're facing? Because as I think we touched on at the start, there are opportunities and solutions available. Very few businesses are really done everything that they could on this front. Let's just maybe look at some of the things that could be done. Amie, I'll start with you on this.
Sure, thank you. So I think it's really positive from our membership in particular that businesses that they've accepted that this is going to be a slightly longer term crisis than some may have first thought. So they are starting to think about what are those actions that they can do themselves. So that, to start with, that's really positive. Businesses ready to act themselves and not wait for government for some of these things. As I said in my first piece, the first things businesses need to do is understand their energy use and their consumption. They can't move on from that unless they understand what's going on in their business, how they're affected, how are they exposed to wholesale prices, all of that sort of thing. The second thing that businesses can do to really take control of that then is to consider a range of what I like to call commercial and physical options and solutions. So on the commercial side, this is things like looking at their energy contract. You know, do they buy it wholesale? Are they on a one fixed contract? And actually, how can they diversify that? How can they diversify that risk? Can they hedge across different timescales? And then linked to what Anthony was saying, can they look at things like corporate power purchase agreements? And I think for many businesses, locking into a 10-year price is now actually starting to look quite attractive. And it's not just for those bigger businesses. We are starting to see slightly smaller, not very, very small businesses, but away from the usual suspects, we are starting to see smaller businesses explore those options to get into fixed prices for a longer period of time. And of course,
and sorry, just for those who don't know, that's signing contracts with renewables generators, getting direct lower cost power, clean power, but having it on a long-term fixed contract.
Yeah, and it's not only really great for energy resilience, weaning off fossil fuels, it's really great for companies' individual corporate targets as well, for their ESG, if they've got energy targets within their net zero targets as well. So really positive, lots of benefits for exploring things like PPAs. And then on the physical side, there's a lot of things we can do in the short term, medium and long term. So short term, kind of immediately, as we touched on previously, looking at things like how are you efficient in your buildings and your operations? Can you switch your light bulbs? Is your heating and cooling system efficient? And then into slightly more medium and long term, can we explore things like fuel switching? Can we explore on-site generation through solar or other forms of renewables? So there's a lot of things that companies can do in the short term to help protect themselves over the next 6 months, and then going into the longer term into next year as we expect prices to remain high. And there's also some really great B2B opportunities here as well. One business isn't going to deliver all the solutions for your organization. We need lots of collaboration going on and bringing all different parts of this sector together. So it's an exciting opportunity. There's net zero opportunities here, but it's also really critical to help businesses manage their costs and resilience in the medium term.
Anthony, anything to add to that that comprehensive list? Or I suppose one of the lessons here is that if companies have looked at this in the past and thought, oh, actually that the costs are a bit high, it's worth doing those calculations again, because the energy cost has changed so fundamentally.
Absolutely right. So I think Amy's summary there was spot on. I'd just be repeating her or what I said earlier. So I think I would probably come at this by saying that the CFO and the CEO should take a look at what we used to call the trilemma, which was the cost of energy, the carbon intensity of it, and the security resilience of supply. Perhaps 5 years ago, 10 years ago, those things pulled in different directions, but right now they are all pulling in the same direction. So what perhaps decarbonisation in the past was a moral imperative and good for business that way, now it makes real strong financial sense to look at this, look at what you're using, where you can invest, you can improve your bottom line, at the same time increasing your own resilience and security of supply, and drive that path to decarbonisation as well. So the 10 years I've been in the energy industry, I don't think there's been a better time to look at this and do something about it.
Absolutely. No, it's one of the few sources of hope, I think, in the net zero transition. We're not moving nearly fast enough, but you're right. For arguably the first time, it's in some ways easier than it's ever been. These technologies do work, and they will deliver these multiple benefits. Arjan, just come to you to wrap up on this before we take questions from the floor. I mean, what would your advice be to energy intensives? Obviously push for those policy changes, but given that could take some time, what could they be doing right now?
Continue to invest in incremental energy efficiency, and just put in process in place to continue to check that what can we do more, and do the cost benefit analysis and to invest in that. The second thing is model the impact of sustained higher industrial gas and electricity prices, as well as decarbonization in the long term, how that impacts on the operation of the company as well as your business strategy. Because if you do that, it would probably, there's a feedback over there saying, well, this is an impact business strategy. Should we then change our business strategy as well?
So don't assume this is necessarily a short-term spike. This, as summer warning, this could be, this could be the new normal. Definitely,
if you look at the forward prices for electricity and gas, they remain high for up till next summer, and then afterwards potentially as well. To a large extent, this is partly determined by politics and what's happening now with the Russian invasion in Ukraine. But that may continue. That will have probably some lasting effects on the energy market in Europe, which means that energy prices will remain high. My third point is that government does have some support scheme in place, like the Industrial Energy Transformation Fund, Industrial Energy Efficiency Accelerator, fuel switching projects. So my suggestion is access those.
Yeah, absolutely. No, a crucial point. There are funds available. And I think, often businesses unaware that there's innovation funding as well for the new exciting stuff, and there's that direct support. People should definitely tap it. Let's go to some of the questions we're getting from the floor. Got one from Michael here. Says, very interesting presentation. A slightly worrying question in some ways. He says, if government do not look further to incentivize businesses to invest in things like self-generation, net zero, where does the panel think business confidence will be this time next year? I suppose, asking you all to gaze into your crystal balls, but I think the implication behind that question is, this is the worry, isn't it? Is that if we don't get action, and if companies don't respond proactively to these concerns, we could be facing a real real economic challenge in the coming months into next year. I mean, Amie, what's your how optimistic are you feeling that businesses can ride this out, or are you concerned that business confidence is about to take a very big hit?
I think we're at quite a crunch point in the economy. I've already set out all the various stresses and pressures that businesses are under. So I think if we don't see real action by the Chancellor come the autumn budget to reinstall confidence right across the economy, then we are going to see business investment hit. We're also going to see business confidence and, of course, investment. And also, if we don't see credible action for consumers as well, which really helps them with the cost of living, the subsequent effects on consumer spending and how that impacts business is really going to hit businesses as well. So I think we are at a crunch point come the autumn. We need to see good action. We need to see confidence installed. We need to see the Chancellor prioritising net zero, investment in energy and energy efficiency for both homes and business. So I think autumn budget is going to be a really, really critical moment.
Yeah, no, it does feel that way. Anthony, I mean, it's a similar question to you. I mean, is the worry here, I suppose, the counter argument to some of these positive things we've touched upon is a CFO going, look, we're just focusing on paying the wages at the moment. Things are looking tight. I mean, what's how concerned are you that a dip in business confidence could really start to make this agenda difficult?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's taken as many years to get to this point that there is this sort of momentum that had built up towards decarbonisation and energy transition, and it's taken a long time to get to that point. Let's not waste everything that got us to this point. So for me, it's a question of and, not or. It's managing through the inflationary pressures, the cost of living, and investing for the future, not one or the other.
Mm. No, absolutely. No, we can't slip into short-termism and just ditch the long-term things. Otherwise, our competitiveness will be undermined long into the future. Arjan, we've got a question directly for you here. Somebody saying they work for a manufacturing business with a big site, and obviously seeing very big energy cost increases being experienced. But they want to do on-site generation. They're looking at it, but the question for a lot of businesses that maybe haven't worked in this space is, how do you do it? Where do you start? I mean, what would your advice be to someone saying, we're interested, but just don't know how to make it happen?
I may be the odd one out in this conversation. If you follow, in my previous role, I've spent more and more time on network charging while I was in government, but now I'm getting deeper involved in that. But unfortunately, what Ofgem is doing over the past years is making changes to network regime that makes on-site generation less commercially viable. They've basically trying to protect the existing asset, basically national grid. And if everybody goes basically on site, which means that the existing people who are still connected to the grid have to pay all the cost. And often it's trying to disincentivize that. So unfortunately, the network changes, the way direction the network charges, the way that's going, it actually makes it less viable to go off grid or but do basically on site. The other bit for the energy industries, if you're big manufacturing, it depends. If you have a solar panel that probably generates too little electricity to support your manufacturing process. For that reason, when you talk about on site for energy industries, you talk about industrial combined heat and power. That's basically it. Because that generates enough heat and electricity to actually be useful in your manufacturing process. That could be an option, but it depends on for this question depends on basically your manufacturing process. What's your profile? How much do you consume, and when do you consume it? There's a point on reliability. So then you make a decision. Basically, will my on-site being more reliable than being connected to the grid? Yes, no. And then ultimately, what are then the cost of doing that? Taking into account the direction that Ofgem is currently taking. So a more nuanced picture. I don't think anymore that on-site is often the best solution for energy industries anymore.
And Anthony, any views on that? I mean, it's obviously, I suppose, an element of horses for courses, but do you agree that maybe Arjan's concerns?
It is a little bit, and of course, Ofgem and governments have got to, as Arjan said, protect the existing asset base, national asset base, but also find ways of encouraging that transition as well. So if you have this challenge and you don't know where to start, I would do two things. So one, talk to your energy company about your energy buying strategy, as we've talked about a couple of times, whether it's spot or flex or fixed over a period, or longer term contracts will probably give you a benefit of lower average prices rather than spot prices. It's not always the same, but that's the first thing to do. Talk to your energy company. And the second thing is talk to your energy company, because right now all of the major energy companies have got parts of their business that deliver energy solutions and help on this. So without making this a sales pitch, the parts of the business that I've run and connected to, we have done for a major a prestige car manufacturer in Europe, the largest solar PV rooftop in Europe. We've just announced a partnership with a major drinks company in Scotland to do the same thing. And a couple of years ago, we built a CHP plant for a drinks manufacturer in the UK, so they could get the benefit of increasing their production, grid resilience, and choosing when to use that CHP for their manufacturing or even sell back to the grid. So talk to your energy company, because the technology exists and the wherewithal to move from knowing nothing to creating some opportunities are there.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I also think one of the other key points here is it's not one size fits all, is it? It very much depends on your site. There's wind, there's solar, there's biogas, there's efficiency, there's all these different routes that you can take to ultimately get returns and cut your emissions. Amie, you've got another question here that actually kind of relates to this. Is people saying they're concerned about greenwashing, and we hear this a lot from businesses saying they want to do the transition to net zero, they want to invest in green issues, but they are just concerned that they'll get criticism for not doing it right, or they're worried, how do you make your plans credible and really effective, and then maximize the benefits, sell them to the audience, make it clear that people know. I mean, what you must hear this a lot from your members. I mean, what's your advice on mitigating those greenwashing concerns?
Yeah, well, I'd agree with everything you just said. This is an increasing concern for our members, as more and more members across all different sectors of the economy are moving to produce greener products, provide greener services, greener, more sustainable, however they want to label it. So it's a risk, but it's also a huge opportunity for businesses moving in to become more green and being part of that transition. It's an opportunity for maintaining and attracting new customers. But at the same time as that, we're also seeing consumer behavior shift and consumers becoming more conscious and more educated on what it actually means to be green, what it means to be sustainable. So it is absolutely critical that businesses are transparent and are very clear that if they are claiming to be green or sustainable or using renewable energy sources, that they can back that up. So yeah, that's my first point. Huge opportunity. We need to run with it. And I think we can be safe to say that businesses are serious about net zero. We've seen a huge rush of businesses in the run-up and post COP26 setting science-based targets, setting all sorts of different sustainability targets, whether it's to do with their packaging or water consumption or energy use, a whole host of things which businesses are committed to do. The really important thing now is about how they translate that into action and how they portray that to their customer. So we need to be really clear, we need to be transparent with our facts and our data. And also, we're going to see increasing legal requirements for mandatory reporting as well, and disclosure of transition plans for listed companies. So over the next couple of years, we are going to see more and more of this available to the public. And I think one piece of advice for a business that is concerned about it is to check with the CMA. They've produced guidance on how to label a product as green or sustainable, and advice on how to keep it simple and transparent. So let's run with the opportunity, but let's just be careful. Let's back it up with data and make it as clear and digestible for our customers.
Absolutely. And Anthony, anything to add to that? And I mean, again, some of the clients you work with must voice this concern. How do you minimize the risk of being accused of greenwashing and ensure that these projects, these strategies are credible?
Yeah, so the business energy tracker said that 70% companies would be really concerned about being accused of greenwashing, and almost a quarter of them would stop doing business with somebody in their supply chain that have been accused of greenwashing. So it is a big issue. But I'd agree with what Amie was saying there, that the standards and visibility on reporting around these things are going up greatly. The education around that within business and within consumers is going up greatly. So I think as we sort of converge on this is how we report things, this is what we do, there's less room for being accused of greenwashing. However, having said that, I think it's really important that businesses look in particular at energy, not only the energy that they're using themselves, but back through the supply chain, these so-called scope 3 emissions, and really pushing everything in their constellation of business to be reporting to these standards and making those shifts towards decarbonisation too.
Absolutely. Just one last question we've got here. We've only got a couple more minutes, so just briefly, if you will, does the panel believe that there should be more private sector investment to reduce energy risk and keep net zero on track? Should businesses be, finding a way to invest more? Yeah, as I say, just in 1 minute, if you might. Arjan, I'll come to you first.
Well, just one point on previous on scope 3 emissions. They often come from energy-intensive industries, who are also those industries that produce those materials that dominate the scope 3 emissions. So there's that link over there as well. On this question, I go back to what I said previously on energy-intensive industries. The decarbonization technologies are more or less there. They just have high capital cost and high operational cost. The business are willing to invest, but they can't take it all about themselves because that would basically make them uncompetitive, and therefore they're looking for some kind of government support scheme to help them.
Indeed. Amie, to you, I mean, should businesses be doing more? I mean, a lot of companies are, even in these tough times, sitting on a lot of capital, sitting on cash. Is it time to invest?
I think there's no doubt in the private sector that we will provide the investment, the levels of investment needed to deliver the transition. And you rightly say, a lot of investors are sitting on money, if you will. Take offshore wind, for example, we know we need 150 billion of private investment by 2030. If you take all the other technologies as well, that's billions and billions that will be needed. What is critical now is getting that policy and regulatory frameworks in place, which will help unlock that investment. So to answer the question, absolutely, the private sector has a key role to play in this. We are ready to unlock it. Government just needs to play its part to help give us that confidence to do so.
Indeed. And Anthony, the final word is yours.
Yes, is a simple answer. I think if you look at the data, we need to shift from investing 10 billion a year to 50 billion a year in the next decade to make this transition. The business cases for this have never been stronger, and the technology availability and the cost of that is in exactly the right place. What we have now is, we have the energy crunch, the business confidence crunch right now. We have a lot of volatility and a lot of uncertainty, and what businesses need is confidence and certainty to invest. And I think this is the government role now to play, is extending those incentives and say, yes, the business cases look good, and you can invest with confidence over the medium term. That's the role that they have to play.
Yeah, absolutely. Excellent. Well, it's a good place to finish. Thank you so much for all of your time, for the panel, for such an interesting debate. Thanks also for your questions. Sorry I wasn't managed to get through all of them. I understand the team at Empower Business Solutions will be trying to respond to them after the event and hopefully get some answers to your questions. As mentioned, the Business Energy Tracker is published today, and I think you'll be provided with a digital copy, and also we'll be making available a recording of today's debate if there was anything that you did miss. Thanks so much for joining us. As I say, just to wrap up, I mean, it is absolutely critical that the net zero transition continues to accelerate for multiple reasons. I mean, as we're seeing, we barely touched on the climate implications of the failure to complete this transition, which are quite frankly terrifying within only 10, 15, 20-year timeframes, incredibly short timeframes. That action is imperative. And also the economic case. Other countries are pursuing this grand green industrial revolution, and if the UK fails to do so, it will be left behind in their wake and become less competitive as a result. So a huge economic competitive imperative. And finally, of course, as we've tragically seen in this year, the energy security and the national security threat is considerable. We are funding countries that do not have our best interest or liberal democracy's best interests at heart. And we are continuing to fund them through our reliance on fossil fuels. So if there are alternatives available, maybe we should be pursuing them as quickly as possible. It's been a fascinating discussion. I think the general consensus is the government does need to do a lot more. This is a serious challenge. We are living in serious times. But equally, there are exciting and important and attractive steps all businesses can take to do their bit on this agenda. So if you haven't